Did you know that the first speculative bubble in history involved something as simple as flowers? The Tulip Mania, which occurred in the 17th century, turned tulips into symbols of extreme wealth, pushing the Dutch market to the brink of irrationality. The interesting part is that the collapse came suddenly, ruining fortunes overnight. What can we learn from this extraordinary phenomenon that still resonates in modern crises? Let's find out. The Dutch Golden Age and the rising economy. The 17th century was a time of great splendor for the Netherlands, known as the Golden Century. The nation established itself as a global economic power, thanks to maritime trade that expanded the boundaries of the European economy beyond continents. Amsterdam emerged as one of the most influential financial centers of the time, where innovation and ambition flourished. This extraordinary growth was not limited to the trade of physical goods, but also included scientific advancements, the popularization of art, and the development of sophisticated financial institutions, such as the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. In this atmosphere of excitement and optimism, Dutch society was ripe for the emergence of innovative and unexpected phenomena, such as Tulip Mania. The wealth circulating throughout the Netherlands naturally generated curiosity for novelties and status symbols. The affluent classes sought ways to display their influence, going beyond gold or property. The pursuit of differentiation fueled a unique consumer culture, where rare and exotic items were valued extraordinarily. It was within this context that tulips, initially seen as mere garden ornaments, began to gain an aura of mystery and fascination, transforming into true living treasures. As maritime trade led the Dutch to new horizons, society itself experienced an unprecedented cultural flourishing. Artists like Rembrandt and Vermeer captured the soul of a nation that seemed to be at the height of its trajectory. This widespread confidence in the future encouraged investments of all kinds, from the arts to speculative ventures. The abundance of capital and optimism about progress made the Netherlands a fertile environment for new opportunities and, of course, also for risky adventures, such as the tulip market. At the same time, technological and financial innovations brought new tools to commerce. Futures contracts and credit systems enabled merchants and ordinary citizens to participate in markets that had previously been exclusive to the elite. The combination of an expanding economy, new forms of trade, and a society eager for novelties created the ideal conditions for a speculative bubble of historic proportions to develop, even though few recognized this at the time. This atmosphere of euphoria, innovation, and excess would be the perfect breeding ground for what was to come. At the height of its prosperity, the Netherlands was about to experience an extraordinary episode that would unite the deepest human desires for wealth and prestige with the fragility of collective psychology. Tulip Mania was on the way, and its effects would be remembered for centuries. The introduction of tulips to Europe. Tulips arrived in Europe in the 16th century, brought from the Ottoman Empire, where they were already appreciated for their exotic beauty and vibrant color variety. Initially, these unusual bulbs piqued the curiosity of botanists and collectors, who saw in the plant a mystery of nature. However, it didn't take long for the fascination with tulips to spread among the European elite, especially in the Netherlands. There, the flourishing of tulips perfectly aligned with the pursuit of status and power symbols, transforming the flowers into coveted objects and later, true luxury items. As the fame of tulips grew, they began to be cultivated in sophisticated gardens, adorning the residences of wealthy merchants and aristocrats. Their brightly colored petals and unusual patterns, such as the multicolored variations resulting from viral infections, made certain tulips especially rare and valuable. This seemingly simple phenomenon represented something extraordinary. A common plant had been elevated to an almost mystical position, where owning a rare tulip was seen as synonymous with influence and wealth. Tulips quickly became more than mere flowers. They represented one's ability to access the extraordinary and to be part of an elite that could afford to own something so ephemeral and yet so valuable. Thus, tulips entered a cycle of social valuation that surpassed mere aesthetic value. They were now a status symbol, with powerful merchants and even citizens from lower classes seeing in tulips an opportunity for social ascent. The arrival of these flowers in Dutch lands occurred at a time when society was ready to absorb such novelties. The Golden Age created an atmosphere where interest in innovations, whether artistic or commercial, was at its peak. Tulips, with their exotic and mysterious appearance, fit perfectly into this context of prosperity and insatiable curiosity for all things rare and valuable. It wasn't just their beauty that made them so desired, but what they represented in terms of power and prestige. This desire for tulips would soon extend beyond the confines of private gardens. What began as a trend among the wealthy would quickly evolve into something much larger. Just as a small spark can ignite a great fire, the fascination with these exotic flowers would spread throughout Dutch society, fueling a cycle of speculative valuation that would result in one of the first and most notorious financial bubbles in history. The stage was set for Tulip Mania, the rapid appreciation of tulip bulbs. The skyrocketing prices of tulip bulbs were an extraordinary phenomenon that surprised even the most experienced Dutch merchants. As tulips became status symbols, the demand for rare varieties surged. Some bulbs, like the famous Semper Augustus, came to be regarded as true jewels of nature, fetching incredibly high prices. What was once an exotic plant transformed into a high-value asset, with society placing ever-increasing expectations on its future appreciation. Part of this increase was directly linked to the rarity of certain tulips, especially those displaying multicolored patterns caused by a virus that altered the colors of the petals. This peculiarity meant that bulbs of some varieties were sold at prices equivalent to luxurious houses along the canals of Amsterdam. At this point, it was not just gardeners and collectors interested in acquiring these tulips, but also merchants and ordinary citizens who saw them as an easy profit opportunity. The psychology behind this unchecked appreciation was driven by the herd effect. As soon as some tulips began to become more expensive, more people became interested in investing, believing that prices would continue to rise indefinitely. There was an almost blind belief that tulips would be a guaranteed source of wealth, leading even those without any prior gardening knowledge to get involved in the market. What was happening was something innovative, where simple flowers became the center of an intense speculative market. Another contributing factor to the rapid appreciation was access to easy credit. Many buyers did not have immediate cash to pay for these expensive bulbs, but entered the market with the expectation of selling the tulips at an even higher price before payment was due. This created a vicious cycle, where more and more people risked entering an increasingly inflated market. It was a frenzied race for quick profits, without considering the inherent dangers of the speculation. At the height of this frenzy, tulips ceased to be merely exotic plants and became the center of one of the largest speculative episodes in history. This extraordinary appreciation, however, carried within it the signs of a fragile and unsustainable market. What seemed like an opportunity for unlimited wealth was about to reveal its true risks. The foundations of this market were far from solid, and what rose so quickly would ultimately fall with even greater force. The economy of Tulip Mania. Trade and futures contracts. The tulip market in the Netherlands was not limited to simple exchanges of bulbs at fairs or markets. It rapidly evolved, creating more sophisticated trading mechanisms, such as futures contracts. This type of contract allowed buyers to acquire tulips for delivery on future dates, paying a fraction of the total value at the time of the agreement. This facilitated greater entry into the market, as it was not necessary to have the full amount immediately, which, in turn, further fueled speculation. This innovation in trade helped accelerate the appreciation process, but also increased the risks. Futures contracts also encouraged the participation of traders and speculators who were not interested in cultivating or owning tulips, but merely in profiting from price differences. As a result, the tulip market began to function similarly to the stock market, where investors bought bulbs in the expectation of selling them for a higher price in the future. The economy of tulips was deeply rooted in speculation, where prices were based more on future profit expectations than on the actual value of the flowers. Furthermore, The lack of regulation in the tulip market allowed transactions to occur in a highly risky manner. Many investors made purchase promises without having the real means to pay, relying on the belief that they could sell the contract before the delivery date. It was a genuine gamble, where confidence in the continuous rise of prices fueled increasingly bold decisions. The cycle of buying and selling based on future promises would ultimately prove unsustainable, but at that moment, it seemed like an irresistible opportunity. The trade in tulips was also widely disseminated across all social classes. From wealthy merchants to artisans and peasants, everyone wanted to participate in a market that promised quick and easy profits. The popularization of futures contracts facilitated this participation, allowing even those with limited resources to invest in tulips. This democratization of speculation was one reason the market grew so rapidly, but it also contributed to the magnitude of the impact when the bubble finally burst. The economy surrounding tulips became a clear example of how unchecked speculation can artificially inflate the prices of an asset. While many were excited about immediate profits, few paused to consider what would happen when the market could no longer sustain those prices. And so, what began as a simple commercial innovation would soon transform into a trap for thousands of investors, making it clear that the risk was as great as the reward. The excesses of the market, surreal prices, and iconic stories. At the height of Tulip Mania, stories about transactions involving tulips surpassed the limits of reason. Accounts of tulip bulbs being exchanged for extremely valuable goods, such as carriages, mansions, and even land, became urban legends. One of the most iconic examples was the Semper Augustus, a tulip with white petals and red veins that reached prices equivalent to a luxurious house along the famous canals of Amsterdam. Such exaggerated transactions clearly demonstrated how inflated the market had become, with tulips valued far more than any tangible asset. The tale surrounding the Semper Augustus, which became almost mythical, illustrated the level of speculation the market had reached. It is said that, in a famous transaction, a single bulb of this variety was exchanged for 12 acres of land. The intrinsic value of the tulip was completely disproportionate to reality, but this mattered little to the speculators of the time. The expectation that prices would continue to rise blinded investors, who believed they held a true fortune in their hands when, in reality, they were sustaining a bubble. Another extraordinary example involved a sailor who, by mistake, allegedly ate an extremely valuable tulip bulb, confusing it with an ordinary onion. The loss of the bulb caused great uproar, as its value was equivalent to years of wages for a common worker. These exaggerations further fueled the popular imagination about the tulip market, making even those who did not directly participate in the transactions familiar with the stories of wealth and extravagance surrounding the flowers. It was a clear sign that Tulip Mania had transcended the financial world and become a cultural phenomenon. While these extravagant transactions made headlines, the reality behind them was much darker. Many of those investing large sums in tulips did so with borrowed money, believing they could sell the bulbs for even greater amounts before needing to repay their debts. However, the risks they were taking were proportionally high, and as the market inflated with these tales of quick profits, the possibility of a collapse became increasingly imminent. The excesses were a clear reflection of a market that was no longer based on logic or real value. These iconic stories not only illustrate the impact of Tulip Mania as a financial phenomenon, but also showcase the power of mass psychology in creating distorted realities. In a moment of euphoria, even the simplest object, like a flower, could be transformed into a symbol of unattainable wealth. The market, inflated by speculation and unrealistic expectations, was poised for a fall. Yet, up until that point, people clung to the stories of success, feeding the belief that the extraordinary cycle of appreciation would never end. The market collapse, saturation, and panic. In February 1637, the tulip market, which until then seemed like an endless source of wealth, collapsed abruptly and surprisingly. Several factors contributed to this collapse, but the primary one was market saturation. With so many people planting, trading, and speculating on tulips, the supply of bulbs began to exceed actual demand. What was once rare and valuable, like the Semper Augustus, was now surrounded by a growing number of less valuable varieties still present in the market. The bubble was starting to show its first signs of fragility. Another decisive factor was the loss of confidence among investors. As some began to question the exorbitant prices at which tulips were being sold, panic quickly set in. Those who had invested considerable sums, hoping to profit from future sales, rushed to sell their bulbs before prices fell even further. Within weeks, the market transitioned from an environment of optimism and expectation to one of despair, where everyone tried to salvage what they could. Panic spread rapidly among investors, many of whom lacked the necessary funds to honor their futures contracts. People desperately tried to unload their tulips, but the number of buyers had decreased drastically. As a result, prices plummeted dramatically. Bulbs that had been traded for small fortunes just days before now found no buyers even at a fraction of their original value. This domino effect exacerbated the crisis, with accumulated debts becoming impossible to settle. The collapse of Tulip Mania exposed the vulnerabilities of the speculative system that had been built around tulips. The lack of regulation and the ease with which people could enter the market, often without real financial means, create an environment ripe for bubble formation. The sudden collapse not only ruined the finances of many individuals, but also shook confidence in speculative trading practices, leaving a profound mark on Dutch society. Although the Dutch government refused to intervene directly to save the market, some local courts allowed for the renegotiation of contracts in an attempt to minimize the damage. However, for many, the damage was already done. The collapse of Tulip Mania served as a harsh historical lesson about the dangers of unchecked speculation, demonstrating that when a market loses touch with reality and is based solely on expectations of future profits, the fall can be as rapid as the rise. Impacts on society, indebtedness, and disillusionment. The collapse of Tulip Mania left a trail of significant consequences for Dutch society, particularly among those who had invested fortunes or incurred debts to participate in the tulip market. Many ordinary citizens, drawn in by the promise of quick and easy gains, found themselves utterly ruined. The dream of social ascension through the sale of rare tulips turned into a nightmare, and entire families lost their savings, land, and, in some cases, even their homes. Disillusionment took hold, especially among those who believed that financial prosperity was within everyone's reach. One of the greatest tragedies of Tulip Mania was the widespread indebtedness. As many investors purchased tulips through futures contracts, believing they could sell them at higher prices before the due date, the collapse left them trapped in unpayable debts. The inability to settle these contracts generated a cycle of default that shook small family economies and affected entire communities. The impact was most severe among those who were not part of the merchant elite, but risked everything in a market that promised quick and effortless wealth. Disillusionment with the tulip market also spread among traders and speculators who, although more experienced, were also hit by the collapse. Many savvy investors managed to exit the market before the total collapse, but those who stayed until the end lost substantial fortunes. Confidence in financial markets was profoundly shaken, and tulips, once seen as symbols of luxury and prosperity, came to be remembered as one of the greatest speculative failures in history. The financial elite also suffered a significant loss of prestige, as many blamed them for the bubble. Socially, the impact was profound. Trust in markets and speculative practices was undermined, and tulips, which had once been a symbol of wealth and sophistication, became synonymous with recklessness and excess. The idea that something as fragile as a flower could ruin the lives of so many was hard to accept. Tulip Mania served as a bitter reminder of the vulnerability of human psychology in the face of the promise of quick wealth and the destructive power of collective greed. However, despite individual losses, the macroeconomic impact of Tulip Mania was relatively contained. The Dutch economy, supported by its solid commercial foundations, managed to recover quickly. But for those who lost everything, the legacy of Tulip Mania was a clear warning about the dangers of placing all hopes in a market inflated by unrealistic expectations. And while the collapse was felt most acutely on a personal scale, The episode served to open society's eyes to the perils of excessive speculation and the fragility of unregulated markets. The role of government and institutions. In the face of the sudden collapse of the tulip market, many investors expected the Dutch government to intervene to prevent an even greater catastrophe. However, the government adopted a surprisingly passive stance. Instead of rescuing investors or attempting to stabilize the market, the authorities chose not to intervene directly. This decision reflected the belief that the market should self-regulate and that the excesses committed by speculators should be corrected naturally without state interference. The result was a financial crisis for many, but a valuable lesson for the Dutch financial system. While the central government maintained its distance, local courts played an important role in resolving tulip contracts that could not be fulfilled. Many individuals who had purchased tulips through futures contracts but could not pay when the market collapsed turned to the judiciary for solutions. In some cases, the courts allowed contracts to be renegotiated, with buyers paying only a fraction of the initially agreed amount. These measures helped partially alleviate the impact of the collapse, but they did not prevent many investors from losing significant sums. The absence of formal regulation in the tulip market was one of the factors that allowed for the unchecked creation and growth of the speculative bubble. There were no clear rules to prevent individuals without sufficient financial resources from becoming involved in the market, which allowed the cycle of speculation to continue until it reached unsustainable levels. The lack of oversight also enabled risky practices, such as excessive trading of futures contracts, to become commonplace. When the market finally crumbled, it became evident that there was an urgent need for greater control and transparency in financial markets. The role of financial institutions at the time was also limited. Although the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was already one of the most advanced in the world, tulips were traded largely outside this formal environment, in local markets and even in taverns. This made the tulip market even more vulnerable to volatility and manipulation. Without adequate mechanisms to regulate and monitor these transactions, the market became fertile ground for uncontrolled speculation, resulting in a collapse that could have been avoided with stricter oversight. The lesson that Tulipomania left regarding regulation and the role of government and institutions was clear. Markets without clear rules and control mechanisms are prone to excesses and catastrophic failures. The lack of direct government intervention during the collapse may have avoided a financial bailout, but it also highlighted the need to create a more robust system to protect investors and prevent similar crises from occurring again. And even though the impact of Tulipomania was relatively contained in macroeconomic terms, its lessons would resonate for centuries, influencing how governments and institutions would handle future speculative crises. Mass psychology, the influence of emotions on markets. One of the most intriguing factors of Tulipomania was the role that mass psychology played in the rise and fall of the tulip market. The collective euphoria surrounding rare bulbs was fueled not only by the actual appreciation of tulips, but also by the belief that prices would continue to rise indefinitely. This phenomenon, where irrational behavior spreads among large groups of people, is a classic example of how emotions can dominate economic decisions. Greed and the fear of missing out shaped the behavior of thousands, creating an unprecedented speculative bubble. The herd effect was particularly evident during Tulipomania. As tulips began to appreciate in value, people, driven by curiosity and ambition, started investing in the hope of quick profits. It was as if no one wanted to miss out on a market that seemed to offer extraordinary rewards. This behavior was replicated across different social levels, from wealthy traders to ordinary citizens, all swept up by the emotion of the moment. Rational decisions were replaced by the collective desire to get rich quickly, leading to a complete disconnection between tulip prices and their real value. At the same time, the phenomenon of psychological scarcity was widely exploited. The perceived rarity of certain tulip varieties, such as the Semper Augustus, created the impression that these bulbs were unique treasures. This further increased the emotional appeal of owning them, fueling the cycle of appreciation. In reality, many investors were not even interested in the flowers themselves, but in the expectation that they could sell them for an even higher price. It was the promise of future gain that drove the market, not the desire for the product. This disconnect between logic and emotion is a classic pattern in speculative bubbles. However, just as human emotions were responsible for inflating the bubble, they also played a crucial role in its bursting. When the first signs of market saturation appeared, panic quickly set in. The fear of losing everything propelled a rush to sell bulbs at any price. The same mass psychology that had fueled the initial euphoria now turned against the market, with more and more investors desperately trying to exit. The collapse was as abrupt as the rise, illustrating how collective behavior can rapidly transform market dynamics. The lesson that Tulip Mania offers about the influence of emotions on markets is clear. Greed and fear can be powerful and destructive forces. When a large group of people acts in unison, basing their actions on emotional expectations rather than rational assessments, the result is often a dangerous dissonance between perceived value and actual value. Tulip Mania was an extraordinary example of this, but mass psychology continues to be a relevant factor in financial crises to this day, as seen in episodes like the dot-com bubble and the 2008 financial crisis. Lessons for the future. The legacy of Tulip Mania in modern crises. The Tulip Mania of 1637 left lasting lessons about the dangers of excessive speculation, lessons that remain relevant in today's financial markets. One of the key takeaways from this phenomenon is the risk of investing based on irrational expectations of continuous appreciation. When the price of an asset becomes disconnected from its intrinsic value, sustained only by the hope of future profits, the likelihood of a speculative bubble increases exponentially. This behavior, widely observed during Tulip Mania, has repeated itself in crises such as the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s and the housing crisis of 2008, where assets were overvalued based on unrealistic expectations. Another important lesson from Tulip Mania is the fragility of markets in the face of collective psychology. Human emotions, such as greed and fear, can amplify market movements in unpredictable ways. During Tulip Mania, we saw how initial euphoria led to a rush for tulips, inflating prices to unsustainable levels. However, once confidence in the market was shaken, panic set in, and prices plummeted rapidly. This cycle of euphoria and panic is a constant feature of speculative bubble episodes, as demonstrated in the 2008 financial crisis, where belief in the continuous appreciation of the real estate sector collapsed almost overnight. Tulip Mania also underscores the importance of regulation and transparency in financial markets. The lack of controls in tulip trading, such as unregulated futures contracts and the absence of protective mechanisms, was a crucial factor in the emergence and collapse of the bubble. This pattern has repeated itself in more recent crises, such as the collapse of derivative markets during the 2008 crisis. Thus, Tulip Mania highlights the need for adequate oversight to prevent excessive speculative behavior and protect investors from their own emotional impulses. The concept of intrinsic value is another key point illuminated by Tulip Mania. At the height of the bubble, tulips were traded as if they were gold, yet in the end, they were just flowers, lacking any practical utility or economic value that justified their astronomical prices. This disconnect between real value and speculative price is a crucial lesson for modern investors, who often see assets inflated by fleeting trends, such as cryptocurrencies or tech startups that sometimes fail to deliver returns commensurate with their market valuations. The legacy of Tulip Mania remains a timeless warning. Markets can be influenced by both logic and emotion, and the consequences of blindly following collective euphoria can be devastating. Understanding the lessons of this historical event is essential to avoiding similar mistakes in the present. While the extraordinary phenomena of Tulip Mania continue to intrigue scholars and investors alike, the same patterns of irrational behavior continue to shape financial crises throughout the centuries. Tulip Mania teaches us that when we let euphoria and fear guide our financial decisions, the outcome can be disastrous. But the good news is that we can learn from the past to make smarter choices in the future. And you? Will you continue to repeat the same mistakes? Or are you ready to change your way of thinking? If you want more tips and amazing stories about economics and finance, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming videos.